Can a story of loss and hardship become a story of hope and redemption? What happens when we trust in God's timing and faithfulness? In today's episode, we dive into the beautiful story of Ruth, a tale of loyalty, love, and divine providence. From Ruth's decision to follow her mother-in-law to the unexpected redemption through Boaz, this book shows how God works through ordinary lives to accomplish His extraordinary plan. How can we find hope in our own seasons of uncertainty? Let's explore the deep themes of trust and redemption in Ruth's journey.
Wow, you've really gone all in on the book of Ruth. Theological deep dives, character analyses, historical context. It's impressive. You must really love this story.
It's certainly a popular one.
And for good reason. Ruth is just amazing. But let's be real. Who has time to get through all of this material? That's where we come in, right?
You've given us some truly fascinating material to work with, and we're here to help you, the listener, extract the most important insights from all of it.
Exactly.
So for anyone who needs a quick recap, the Book of Ruth takes place during the time of the judges in ancient Israel. A pretty chaotic period, actually.
Right.
It follows Naomi, a woman who experiences tremendous loss, and Ruth, her Moabite daughter-in-law.
Whose loyalty is just, wow. It's incredible.
It really is, and that loyalty ultimately leads to unexpected redemption.
Oh.
And here's the kicker. Their story is woven into the lineage of King David.
No way.
And eventually Jesus.
Okay, now we're talking. One thing that really stood out to me as I was going through all this material is that there's just so much more to Ruth than just the romance. I mean, yes, there's a love story there.
Of course.
But it's not the main point.
That's a crucial observation. It's easy to get caught up in the romance, but reducing Ruth to a simple love story really misses the mark.
Yeah.
At its core, it's about God's providence. It's about His unseen hand working behind the scenes, even when life feels, utterly hopeless.
Yes, and I think we can all relate to that feeling of hopelessness at times, right? You hit a rough patch in life, and it feels like things are just beyond repair. But Ruth, she whispers this message of hope, like, hold on, God might be weaving something beautiful that you can't even see yet.
That's a powerful way to put it. Take Naomi, for example. She loses everything that matters to her. Her husband, her sons, her sense of security and belonging.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is. And it's understandable that she feels bitter, even abandoned by God. But God, through Ruth's remarkable loyalty.
And let's not forget Boaz. He was amazingly generous.
He certainly was. Through those actions, God provides for Naomi in ways she could never have imagined.
It's true. And speaking of Ruth's loyalty, there's that incredible line where she declares to Naomi, "Your people will be my people, and your God my God." Now, that's what I call commitment. It wasn't just some casual promise she was making.
Exactly. This statement goes so much deeper than a simple pledge. Remember, Ruth was a Moabite. She was willingly leaving behind everything she knew, her homeland, her culture, her gods, to follow Naomi into a land where she would be an outsider, a foreigner. That was a monumental risk.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Oh.
Have you ever faced a decision where standing by someone meant a significant sacrifice on your part?
It's a tough question.
Ruth's story really challenges us to examine the depth of our own loyalty and commitment.
Absolutely. Now, an intriguing element in all of this is how Ruth's radical loyalty intersects with the character of Boaz. He's often described as this kind, generous man, a true gentleman, who protects Ruth in a society where, let's face it, widows were incredibly vulnerable.
Okay, I have to confess, I have a bit of a soft spot for Boaz. He seems like such a genuinely good guy.
He certainly possesses some admirable qualities, but it's important to note that Boaz's actions went far beyond the bare minimum. He didn't just offer Ruth a place to glean in his fields. He went above and beyond, ensuring she received extra grain, inviting her to share meals with his workers, and actively making sure she felt safe and protected.
So he's more than just your average nice guy. There's something else about Boaz, something that adds a whole other layer of significance to the story, right?
Precisely. This is where things get really interesting. Boaz was what's known as a kinsman redeemer.
A kinsman redeemer.
Yes, and this ancient practice wasn't just about good deeds. It had a legal and spiritual dimension. It foreshadows Christ's role as our redeemer.
Wait a minute. Are you suggesting that Boaz is like a prefigurement of Jesus in this story?
It's not a perfect one-to-one comparison, but there are undeniable parallels. Boaz, by marrying Ruth, restored Naomi's family line. and provided for their future.
Right.
This act mirrors how Jesus restores our relationship with God and secures our eternal inheritance. It's this beautiful image of redemption woven into the fabric of the story.
Okay, now I'm starting to see all these layers unfolding, but let's talk about those seemingly coincidental moments in Ruth. How is it that she just happens to end up gleaning in Boaz's field? And the timing of everything.
Yeah.
It almost feels too perfect to be random.
That sense of perfect timing points to what we mean by God's providence. He's orchestrating events, even the ones that seem insignificant or random, to bring about his purposes.
So if God can work through a chance meeting in a field, what's he doing in those seemingly mundane, everyday moments in our own lives? I mean, that's incredible.
That's the question, isn't it? Do you ever feel like your life is just a series of random happenings?
All the time.
The book of Ruth encourages us to look for God's hand, even in the ordinary, because he might be working through those very circumstances in ways we can't yet comprehend.
And now get this. This is the part that really blew my mind. Ruth, a Moabite woman, an outsider, ends up becoming an ancestor of King David. And ultimately, Jesus. Can you believe that?
It's remarkable, isn't it? But it's not just a fascinating historical detail. This inclusion of Ruth, a foreigner, shatters all sorts of cultural and religious boundaries at that time. It demonstrates that God's plan encompasses everyone, regardless of their background or origin.
I love that. It's as if Ruth is saying to each of us, hey, if you're feeling insignificant, like your life doesn't matter, think again. God can use anyone for his purposes.
Exactly. And that brings us to another crucial point. Remember, Ruth was a widow.
Right.
In a society where widows were often left destitute and with very few options.
That's what makes Boaz's actions as a kinsman redeemer so powerful. He wasn't just being a nice guy. He was literally providing for Ruth and Naomi, restoring their place in society.
Precisely. And when we view this through the lens of God's providence, it highlights how deeply God cares for the vulnerable, for those who are often marginalized or overlooked. He provides for them in unexpected ways, often through the compassion and actions of others.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces of the story fit together. It's this incredible tapestry of loyalty, redemption, and God's providence. It's amazing.
And it's a tapestry that speaks to us regardless of our background or beliefs. Whether you've spent years studying the text or you're just beginning to explore the book of Ruth, there's a universal power in this story that resonates deeply.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about Ruth's extraordinary loyalty, the significance of Boaz as a kinsman redeemer, and how this all connects to God's providence, even in seemingly ordinary events.
And we've seen how this seemingly small ancient story connects to the grand narrative of Scripture, leading all the way to Jesus. It's remarkable. It's fascinating how often we just kind of overlook the utter bleakness of the situation at the beginning of the story.
Oh, totally. We tend to gloss over the whole famine thing, but I mean, that was life or death back then.
Exactly. Famine in ancient Israel wasn't just an inconvenience. It brought starvation, social upheaval, desperation. It's against this backdrop of scarcity and uncertainty that the story of Ruth unfolds. So, it really puts Naomi's bitterness into perspective. It's easy for us to say, just trust God. But she'd lost her husband, her sons, everything. Her entire world had been shattered.
I can't even imagine.
And that's where I think Ruth's character shines even brighter. Instead of succumbing to despair alongside Naomi, she chooses hope. She chooses to believe that, even amidst profound loss, there's still good to be found.
It's amazing. But let's be honest, it wasn't all sunshine and roses for Ruth either. I mean, she was a widow, a foreigner, alone in a new land with no safety net. She must have been terrified.
Undoubtedly. But what's striking is her resilience. She doesn't let fear paralyze her. She takes action, going out to glean in the fields, a task that was often, backbreaking and humbling.
And it's in that field that she encounters Boaz. Talk about divine intervention. It feels as though God orchestrated every step of her journey, even the difficult ones.
Their encounter is indeed a beautiful illustration of God's providence. But remember, Boaz wasn't just any landowner, he was a kinsman redeemer, meaning he had a legal obligation to care for vulnerable members of his extended family, like Naomi and Ruth. It's an important detail.
So it was a mere chance that led Ruth to Boaz's field. There was an actual legal structure that God was working through to provide for them.
Precisely. It wasn't just luck or coincidence. God was operating within the existing social and legal framework to accomplish his purposes.
That's mind-blowing. It makes you wonder how often God might be working in our own lives through situations we dismiss as, like, ordinary or coincidental. You know what I mean?
One of the most compelling aspects of the book of Ruth is this very reminder. God is involved in every detail of our lives. even the seemingly insignificant ones. He's working behind the scenes, orchestrating events, weaving a tapestry of redemption that we often can't fully grasp until much later.
It's amazing. It's like you were saying earlier about Boaz prefiguring Christ. God was already setting the stage for his ultimate plan of redemption through Jesus.
Exactly. Just as Boaz redeemed Ruth and Naomi from their desperate situation, Christ redeems us from the ultimate consequence of sin.
Okay, now I have a question about this whole Redeemer process. Why didn't Boaz just marry Ruth right away? Why the added drama with the other kinsman redeemer at the city gate? I mean, come on.
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of the cultural and legal customs of the time. As a kinsman redeemer, Boaz had to follow a specific process to ensure that everything was done properly and legally.
Okay. So it wasn't simply a romantic gesture. It was about upholding the law, restoring justice.
Absolutely. And this legal process adds another layer of meaning to the story. It shows us that God's redemption isn't arbitrary or impulsive. It's grounded in his justice and righteousness.
Which makes the scene at the city gate even more powerful, right? Here's Boaz publicly declaring his commitment to redeem Ruth. Even though it wasn't necessarily the easiest path, he could have just walked away.
Indeed. And the other kinsman's refusal to redeem Ruth further highlights Boaz's character. He could have easily walked away, but he chose to honor his commitment, even at a personal cost.
It's as if he's saying, I'm not just doing this out of duty. I'm doing this because it's right, and because I recognize the inherent value and worth in this woman.
Beautifully put. And this act of selfless love and redemption paves the way for the miraculous birth of Obed, who becomes the grandfather of King David.
And as we've discussed, that lineage ultimately leads to Jesus. So in a sense, Ruth's story is intricately woven into the grand narrative of God's plan to redeem humanity.
Exactly. It's this incredible tapestry where each thread, each character, each event is meticulously woven together by God's sovereign hand.
It makes you want to revisit the book of Ruth with fresh eyes, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Each time you delve into this seemingly simple story, you uncover new layers of meaning, new insights into God's character and his plan for our lives.
You know, we've talked extensively about the theological and historical significance of the book of Ruth, but I'm curious about its lessons on, like, relationships and community, because there's a lot there, right?
That's an excellent point. The profound bond between Naomi and Ruth stands out. It transcended, cultural and familial boundaries.
Right. Ruth wasn't obligated to stay with Naomi. She could have just gone back to Moab, started a new life, but she chose to stay, to care for her mother-in-law, to embrace her people and her God as her own.
It's a powerful testament to loyalty and commitment. It's a reminder that genuine relationships are forged through sacrifice and choosing to stay, even when things get tough.
It also highlights the importance of community, don't you think? Naomi and Ruth didn't go through their struggles in isolation. They had each other, and they had Boaz and the people of Bethlehem who welcomed and supported them.
That's a crucial element. The Book of Ruth emphasizes the importance of having a support system, a network of people who can offer encouragement, practical help, and just a sense of belonging.
And it's not just about receiving support, it's about giving it too, right? Boaz exemplified this perfectly. He saw a need and he stepped up. Not out of mere obligation, but out of genuine care and compassion. It's really beautiful.
And isn't that what we're called to do as well? To be like Boaz, to look for opportunities to serve others, to show kindness and generosity, and to be a source of support and encouragement to those around us.
I think it's one of the most beautiful takeaways from the book of Ruth. It's not just an ancient story about God's providence and redemption. It's a call to action, an invitation to embody those same principles of love, loyalty, and generosity in our own lives. It's really inspiring.
Beautifully articulated, and if we can embrace those principles, if we can strive to be like Boaz in our interactions with others, then we too can become part of that ongoing tapestry of redemption, weaving threads of hope and love into the fabric of our communities and the world around us.
And maybe, just maybe, God will use our seemingly small acts of kindness and faithfulness to achieve something far greater than we could ever imagine.
Wouldn't that be incredible? To think that our lives, like Ruth's, could play a part in God's grand story of redemption.
It's a truly inspiring thought. As we wrap up this part of our conversation, it strikes me that the book of Ruth is more than just a historical account or theological treatise. It's a love story, a story of loss and redemption, a story of hope and faithfulness. It's a story that speaks to the deepest longings of the human heart.
I wholeheartedly agree. And it's a story that continues to resonate with us today, reminding us that even in the midst of our darkest moments, God is at work, weaving together a tapestry of grace and redemption far more beautiful than we could ever imagine.
We've talked about the book of Ruth as this, intricate tapestry of redemption, but it also seems to challenge some pretty deeply ingrained assumptions, especially for the time it was written.
Absolutely. One of the most radical aspects of the story is, of course, Ruth's Moabite heritage. We have to remember that the Moabites were considered outsiders, even enemies, by the Israelites.
Right. There were strict laws and cultural taboos against intermarriage. So for Ruth, a Moabite woman, to not only be welcomed into the community, but to ultimately become part of the lineage of King David, that's huge. That's a seismic shift in perspective.
It completely overturns the prevailing views of, who was in and who was out in God's plan. It's really remarkable.
So it goes beyond God's providence working through individuals. It's about him breaking down barriers and expanding our understanding of who truly belongs.
Precisely. The book of Ruth is like this subversive little story tucked away in the scriptures. It's challenging us to confront our own prejudices and preconceived notions about people who are different from us.
It's as though God is saying, my love and my plan are far more expansive than your limited human categories.
That's a beautiful way to frame it. And this theme of radical inclusivity is further underscored by the fact that Ruth becomes an ancestor of Jesus, the Messiah, who came to offer salvation to all people, not just a select few.
It's powerful. We've uncovered so much in this exploration: God's providence, unlikely heroes, radical inclusivity. But what does it all mean for us, today? How can we apply these ancient principles to our modern lives?
That's the question that lingers, isn't it? I think one of the most profound takeaways from Ruth is that God is still actively at work in the world, even when we can't see it or understand it.
Right.
He's still orchestrating events, weaving together his tapestry of redemption, and using ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things, just like he did with Ruth.
So instead of getting bogged down by the chaos and uncertainty of life, we should actively look for those glimmers of grace, those moments where we catch a glimpse of God's hand at work.
Yes, and we should be willing to be those instruments of grace ourselves, to be like Boaz, stepping up to meet the needs of others, extending kindness and generosity, and striving to create a more just and compassionate world. It's a high calling.
And who knows, maybe if we're attentive to God's leading, he'll use us, just as he used Ruth, to be a part of something far more impactful and beautiful than we could ever imagine.
That's a powerful thought, isn't it? To consider that our seemingly small acts of faithfulness and love can have ripple effects that extend far beyond ourselves, even beyond our lifetimes.
It really opens up a world of possibilities. What might God be doing in and through our lives right now that we can't even begin to grasp? It's amazing.
And that's the beauty and the mystery of the book of Ruth. It beckons us to trust in God's providence, to embrace his radical inclusivity, and to live our lives with a sense of wonder and anticipation, knowing that he's still writing his story, and we have the incredible privilege of being a part of it.
What a perfect note to end on. You've given us so much to think about, and I have a feeling we'll be revisiting the book of Ruth for years to come. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Ruth opens with a story of loss and hardship, yet God's providence is woven throughout. Reflect on the moments in your life where you faced loss or uncertainty. Have you recognized God's hand guiding you even in the darkest times? Ruth's journey reminds us that even in our pain, God is working behind the scenes. If this resonates, subscribe, like, and comment. How have you seen God's providence in your own life during difficult seasons? Ruth's commitment to Naomi shows the power of loyalty and love. But how often do we struggle with being truly faithful in our relationships? Reflect on your own relationships. How can you embody the love and loyalty Ruth showed to Naomi? God calls us to love others selflessly, even when it costs us. If you're inspired to love deeply and faithfully, subscribe, like, and comment. How can you be more loyal and loving in your relationships? Ruth teaches us that redemption is possible, even when the odds seem impossible. Ruth, a Moabite widow, is redeemed into the family of God. Reflect on areas in your life where you may feel overlooked or excluded. Do you believe that God can redeem your story, no matter your background or circumstances? God's grace knows no boundaries. If you're ready to embrace redemption, subscribe, like, and comment. How are you allowing God to redeem your life? The story of Ruth and Boaz shows us what true kindness looks like. Boaz's generosity toward Ruth was a reflection of God's heart. Are you living with that same kind of generosity? Reflect on the ways you can show kindness to others, especially those in need. In a world that often feels cold, God calls us to be a light. If you're ready to act with kindness and generosity, subscribe, like, and comment. How can you extend kindness to those around you? Ruth also teaches us about trusting in God's timing. Ruth's patience as she waited for God's provision was key to her redemption. But how often do we struggle to wait on God's perfect timing? Reflect on areas in your life where impatience has taken over. Are you willing to trust God's timing, knowing that He is never late? If you're ready to trust His timing, subscribe, like, and comment. Where in your life do you need to wait on God's perfect plan? The kinsman-redeemer concept in Ruth is a beautiful picture of how God redeems us through Jesus Christ. Ruth's redemption by Boaz points us to the ultimate redemption we have through Christ. Reflect on the price that was paid for your redemption. Do you truly grasp the depth of Christ's sacrifice? If you are moved by the story of redemption, subscribe, like, and comment. How does Christ's redemption change the way you live today? Ruth's loyalty, humility, and faith lead her to a place of blessing and favor. But how often do we try to take matters into our own hands instead of trusting God to bless us? Reflect on areas where you're striving for control instead of trusting God's plan. Remember, God blesses those who walk in humility and faith. If you're ready to trust God's way, subscribe, like, and comment. How can you walk in humility and faith today? Ruth closes with the beautiful truth that God's plan is often bigger than we can see. Through Ruth's obedience, she became the great-grandmother of King David, part of the lineage of Jesus. Reflect on how your actions today may be part of a greater story God is weaving. Are you willing to step into God's plan, even when you can't see the whole picture? If this message inspired you, subscribe, like, and comment. What part of God's story are you trusting Him with today? Share this message with someone who needs to know their story is part of something much bigger.